Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. In celebration of the spooky month of October, I wanted to put together a seasonally appropriate video, but I don't actually read that much horror because, as I have mentioned many times, I am very easily scared. So because I wasn't able to put together like my top favorite horror novels or great scary novels to read in the month of October, I thought I would put together a video outlining some of the most disturbing novels that I have ever read. So while these might not be considered traditionally scary, although I think a couple of them could probably classify as could be classified as scary, they are novels that were disturbing on a level that stuck with me for a really long time. A couple of them are new reads, so I don't know if they will continue to weigh on me in the years to come, but some of them I read in the early 2000s, and I still think about them, and they still give me that kind of creepy, uncomfortable feeling. So if you are looking for something creepy or uncomfortable to read in this month, then perhaps this video might help you. If you have read some of these stories and you just want to show some solidarity, you want to feel like someone else has been as equally horrified as you, then you can watch and commiserate. But I will talk about 5 different books today that have been various levels of disturbing for different reasons, and chat about why I still think that they're really good books and very much worth reading. So the very first one is a new read to me, but one that I have been wanting to read for a long time, and that is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. So I actually read this book last October. It's been about a month. It's been about a year since I read it, and I still think about it all the time. And I've talked about this a couple of times as well. I went through the very unfortunate loss of a family member at the time that I was reading this book, which I think made it feel even more disturbing to me and had even more of those frightening connotations when I was reading through it. But if you do not know, Pet Sematary is the story of a young doctor who moves to a small town with his family. So his wife, his daughter, and his son, and they all move to this town so that he can live a more enjoyable life as a family physician. I believe he takes a job with the university, and on his first day on the job has a very disturbing encounter with a patient, and starts to have some bad dreams about that patient and the loss of that patient. And as he continues to live in this small town, he becomes friends with his next door neighbor, who starts to make him believe that there may be some supernatural happenings that are taking place around him that he's not supposed to know about. And so from the very first chapters of this book, Stephen King sets up a very creepy atmosphere, a book that feels unsettling just to read through, and it creates this sense of tension that keeps mounting and mounting and mounting as the story goes on. And through the character of this young doctor, we get a window into the ideas of grief and exploration of grief and loss, and how we are impacted by those things, how we recover or can we recover from those things. And it is so well done. It really puts you in the mindset of someone who is experiencing grief, and to what, various degrees, because there are different events that take place in the novel that impact the main character in different ways. And it really makes you feel like you're experiencing that along with him. And it is so chilling. It, more than any other book that I have ever read, made me feel frightened for the things that I could lose or the bad things that could happen. And I think that is why I found it to be so disturbing, is because Stephen King really makes you feel for this character, and that makes you afraid, or I think for a lot of us would make us afraid of going through something similar and having similar experiences. So this is a book that frightened me in various ways, on various levels. I think initially I felt this very creepy sense of what does mortality mean, and having been in scenarios much like the physician in this book, where I have been confronted with people who are on the brink of life or death, people who have passed away, having to identify those people and speak to their loved ones. Like, those are very difficult things to do. And it's very challenging to both do that and also to read about it. And I think that Stephen King captured that very well. And it made for an incredibly disturbing reading experience. So I don't know that I will ever reread Pet Sematary, but I think it's a phenomenal book. I think that he explores a lot of important topics. And if you're looking for something truly creepy this Halloween season, then I think that that is a great place to start. We will move back in time. So this is one of the books that I read a long time ago. I read it when I was living in France, which was 2008 or 2009. So it's been over a decade since I read this book. And I still think about the language that was used in it. I still think about the things that happened. And I still remember exactly how I felt when I was reading it. And that book is A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. So I know a lot of people have seen I think it's by Stanley Kubrick. I think the Stanley Kubrick film, A Clockwork Orange, which I also believe is incredibly disturbing, but also very well acclaimed. I would never watch this movie because I would never get over watching this movie. I think that the images would probably stick with me forever. But A Clockwork Orange is a classic work of dystopian fiction. It tells the story of a world that has been run down and where there are incredibly high rates of crime and violence, especially as people start to close up their homes for the evening. So this is kind of a world that has been overrun by gang violence, and gang violence carried out by very young people. So the main character in this story is Alex, who is the leader of one of these teenage gangs. And through Alex's eyes, we experience a level of dispassionate violence that has been unrivaled in almost any book that I have read. And I recently read, or tried to read, because I still haven't finished it, Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, which has a lot of violence in it. Like, there's a lot of really disturbing things, or things that should be very disturbing, that happen. But you almost feel a little bit removed from the story because of the storytelling style, because of the prose, because of the way that it is told. That is not the case in A Clockwork Orange. A Clockwork Orange is very immersive. The extreme violence that's happening, I think because of the way the book is narrated, feels like you can see it happening. And it's so disturbing. The main character has no empathy. He has no care. He delights in the chaos that he can carry out. And the author uses a lot of slang terms. The one that I always remember is moloko, which is what they call milk. But there's a ton of slang terms that they use in their everyday life, and it makes it feel very vivid and like these could actually be teenagers who are carrying out these horrendous acts. It is, again, a fantastic book. I had a great time reading it. I mean, a great time. I really enjoyed reading it. I thought it was worthwhile. I can see why it's a classic. It's very vivid. It sticks with you. But man, it is so disturbing. It is so disturbing. If you are looking for a work of classic fiction to pick up in October, I would highly recommend A Clockwork Orange, but just go in with the awareness that it might mess you up a little bit. It certainly did for me. We will shift a little bit. So the first couple of books are, very disturbing, but they are novels. They are very well known. The third, this is actually a story that I want to talk about, and this is a short story. I don't even remember how I came across this short story. I think it must have been making the rounds on the internet when it first came out, because it caused a bit of a sensation when it was first released. And the name of the short story is Guts by Chuck Palahniuk. So Chuck Palahniuk, as many of you know, is the author of Fight Club, which is a book that I really enjoy. I really liked it. I really like his writing style. But he released a collection of short stories, which I think the collection is called Haunted. I will pop it up just to be sure. But one of the short stories in this collection is called Guts. And it is the story, because it's so short, I can't even really give you any summary without it being spoilery or feeling spoilery. But I will just tell you that it involves body horror. So if that's something that is too disturbing for you, then don't read it because this will disgust you. But the way that this story was written was so vivid, so visual, that I felt like I could picture everything that was happening. And I still feel like that. Like, just thinking about it right now, I'm like, it is truly one of the grossest, most disturbing things that I have ever read, because the author did such a great job of setting up the story and setting up what is happening. So if you don't mind some body horror elements and you don't mind some disgusting things happening in a story, and now you're very curious because clearly I'm still thinking about this story like 15 years after it was written, then go read it. Just don't be mad at me when you cannot get the images from that story out of your head for the next 15 years, because that is the world that I am living in right now. Oh, yeah, I still think about it. But let's move along to the next one. The fourth entry on this list is actually another one by Stephen King. I have not read all of Stephen King, obviously. I have read, let's say, 40% of his bibliography. Of everything that I have read, this is the most disturbing thing that I feel that he has written. It is a short story that is taken from the collection called Different Seasons, which is very well known because it has the Shawshank Redemption short story and it has the short story The Body, which is what the movie Stand By Me was based on. But one of the other stories in that collection of 4 is called Apt Pupil, which I also believe was made into a movie, but I didn't see it, so I'm not 100% sure. But this is, as I said, for a man who can write some of the most twisted specimens that humanity has to offer, I believe that Apt Pupil is one of the most disturbing things that he has ever read. When I was reading it, I had to take breaks because the things that were happening were just too much. They were too much for me to keep reading about. This tells the story of a young boy who becomes very interested in and almost obsessed with the Holocaust. And through his research, he discovers that one of his neighbors, or one of the people that lives in his neighborhood, is an ex-member of the German army. He was a Nazi during World War II, and he confronts him about this. And in exchange for keeping his identity a secret, he forces this man to tell him stories about the things that he did during the war. And it is this kind of dual perspective story where you get the horrific history of what this character has done, and then you get the mounting fascination of this young boy who is clearly disturbed as he begins to discover more and more about the horrendous acts that took place. And it is a very difficult story to read. I think this whole collection, Different Seasons, is very much worth reading. I think it's a great place to start with Stephen King if you haven't read anything. But this story, like I said, has to be one of the most disturbing things that I have ever read, period, but definitely that I have ever read by Stephen King. It made me feel physically ill as I was reading, and I think it takes a lot of talent to make people feel that uncomfortable. Obviously, the subject matter of this story is something that is very disturbing at baseline, and something I think that is easy for us to picture because we learn about this history and we know about a lot of the really terrible things that happened, a lot of the really terrible things that took place. But reading it from this perspective and watching as someone who is clearly lacking in empathy and those warm characteristics that bind humans together, it was chilling. It was frightening in a way that is different from a lot of Stephen King's other work. So definitely one of the most disturbing things that I have ever read. Gosh, this video is now making all of these things flood back. I'm gonna need to read something really light and fluffy when I am finished filming this. But the very last book on the list is just a section of this book I found profoundly disturbing, and because it affected me so much, I felt like I had to include it on this list, but it's very different from the other books that are on here. And the book is actually The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. So The Poppy War is an adult fantasy novel that integrates elements of shamanistic magic. It has a magical school setting. It is part military fantasy. Like, there's a lot of different elements that come together to create the Poppy War series. The reason that it ended up on this list is that R.F. Kuang pulled from historical record when she was putting together the story of the Poppy War. She wanted to reflect a period of Chinese history, and so she pulled from real world events and real life figures and molded her story, not exactly, but molded her story around those events. And one of the events that served as inspiration for part of the Poppy War series was the massacre at Nanking, which, to my great shame, I had never even heard of until I read The Poppy War. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know that it was a real battle. But there is a part in The Poppy War that was inspired by this historical event. And it is the most difficult battle scene, post-battle scene that I have ever read in fantasy or anything else. I had to take a break from reading the book because it affected me on such a profound level. And then once I knew that it was based on real world events and things that had happened, it was just too much. I feel like a lot of the time I can compartmentalize when I'm reading. Horrible things can happen on page and I can kind of block that off in a little box in my mind and put it away. But when there is violence, especially sexual violence towards children, I cannot do that. And I talked about that in another recent video, but I just do not have the ability to separate that. And not only do I find it really difficult to read about, I then ruminate on it for sometimes like hours, sometimes days. And with the Poppy War, I thought about it for so long. It stayed with me just because I think it was what happened in the book, and then knowing that things like that happened in real life and that things like that continue to happen in certain places in the world in real life. And it just kind of pulled me into this horrible thought spiral. And I think that I will dwell on that particular passage of the Poppy War for a very, very long time. It will be very difficult for me to go back and reread that first book, just knowing what happened. And I mean, the Poppy War is a brutal series. There are a lot of really impactful scenes, a lot of really difficult scenes to read about, but reading that for the first time was incredibly, incredibly disturbing. And for that reason, it has landed itself a place on this list for me. But now that I have sufficiently disturbed myself all over again, that is the end of the list. Like I said, I don't read a lot of classic horror. I don't read a lot of really scary books, but these are some of the books that have definitely been very disturbing to me over the course of my reading life. If you have read any of these, I would like to know if they also impacted you in the same way, or if you were very easy, like you could easily brush them off. Are there any other books that you feel like have had this really profound, disturbing impact on you? I would love for you to share them below. Not saying that I will read them. I will actually probably avoid them. But I would like to know what kinds of books have had a similar impact on some of you. And I hope that this was not too difficult a video to get through. And I will see you with hopefully a much more cheerful video soon. Bye.